Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah wahdahu la sharika lahu wa ashhadu anna Muhammadan abduhu wa rasuluh. Amma ba'du fa'uzu billahi minash shaitanir rajim. Bismillahir rahmanir rahim. Assalamu alaikum to our viewers and listeners. This is study 28 of the Ramadan Daily Quran studies for the year 2020, and I'm Zahid Aziz delivering these on behalf of the Anjuman Ishat Islam Lahore, UK. This is the seventh study in the series on the doctrine of abrogation, and the good news is that it's the last one in this series, in case you're getting tired and bored with the discussion of this topic, which is quite possible. So, there is another verse in chapter 3 which shows that verse 85 of chapter 3, the verse which said, "And whoever seeks a religion other than Islam, it will not be accepted from him, and in the hereafter he will be one of the losers." Now there's another verse in chapter 3 which shows that this verse is not abrogating the teaching regarding the importance of the common principles between Islam and previous religions. And that verse is just before this and is 64. قُلْ يَا أَهْلَ الْكِتَابِ تَعَالَوْا إِلَى كَلِمَةٍ سَوَاءٍ بَيْنَنَا وَبَيْنَكُمْ أَلَّا نَعْبُدَ إِلَّا اللَّهَ وَلَا نُشْرِكَ بِهِ شَيْئًا وَلَا يَتَّخِذَ بَعْضُنَا بَعْضًا أَرْبَابًا مِنْ دُونِ اللَّهِ فَإِنْ تَوَلَّوْا فَقُولُوا اشْهَدُوا بِأَنَّا مُسْلِمُونَ, which translates as, "Say, O people of the book, come to an equitable word between us and you, that we shall serve none but Allah, and that we shall not set up any partner with him, and that some of us shall not take others for lords besides Allah. But if they turn away, then say to them, bear witness, we are Muslims." Chapter 3, verse 64. This equitable word that the people of the book are called to come to an equitable word between us and you. This equitable word is what all sides can agree on, and that is to worship none but God, not to set up partners with him, thereby giving those partners some of God's attributes, and not to take any persons in one's community as lords to be obeyed like God. And this equitable word, or these common points, these are the core and fundamental teachings in the Jewish and Christian scriptures. These are the ones that Islam calls people to accept in their pure, unsullied form. At the end of this verse, Muslims are told to say to the people of previous religions that this is what makes us Muslims. Accepting these points has made us Muslims. So when a few verses later, verse 85 verse 85 mentions those who seek a religion other than Islam, it means those who have deviated from the core and fundamental teachings of their own religions. The points which are this equitable word mentioned here. Now, another point to be noted is that in this verse 64, Muslims, about the come to an equitable word between you and us, Muslims are, of course, inviting others to Islam. They are not inviting people to reach some compromise, some halfway position between them and us. The only thing Muslims can invite people to is Islam. That's what they're inviting them to in this verse. But they're inviting them by opening up the crux of Islam, the inside of Islam, and putting it before them. Muslims are not saying to others simply become Muslims or embrace Islam, and they are certainly not taught to say to others become Muslims or else. As I stated in study number 26, the doctrine of abrogation has been used to suppress and deny those injunctions of the Quran which show its attitude of tolerance towards other faiths and its teachings of peaceful and harmonious coexistence with the followers of other faiths. And this point is taken up in detail by a Muslim writer from, I believe, the USA, Abdul Hamid A. Abu Sulaiman, in a book entitled Towards an Islamic Theory of International Relations, the second and revised edition of which was published as long ago as 1993. He has in his book a subheading, Naskh, Misinterpretation and Misconception. That is the entire heading, Naskh, Misinterpretation and Misconception. And he writes under there, in the area of external affairs means affairs, matters between Muslims and non-Muslims. In the area of external affairs, the most widely discussed and disputed issue has been the verse of the sword. Some jurists took an extreme position in interpreting this verse. They claimed that this verse abrogated all preceding verses pertaining to patience, sabr, persuasion, husna, and tolerance, la ikrah. For instance, Ibn al-Arabi and Ibn Salama believed that the verse of the sword had abrogated a total of 124 verses. Mustafa Abu Zayd says that he found the number of verses that were abrogated by that same verse of the sword to exceed 140. Those who stressed the aggressive nature of jihad could only do so by applying abrogation to a wide category of Quranic verses. If this misconception is removed, then the misinterpretation application of abrogation can be corrected. In this way, the damaging effects of the method of abrogation would be eliminated. This is from pages 45 to 46 of his book, his very valuable book. And then later on in his book, he goes on to write the following about this concept of naskh, which is worth listening to word for word. Due to this concept, the different principles and values behind the Islamic experience in Makkah and early Medina have fallen into disuse and been forgotten. In considering naskh, which means abrogation, all that mattered to the jurists was the last position of the late Medina period. It is as if the jurists considered the periods and stages prior to the last Medinan period as having been historically abrogated and therefore unworthy of consideration. Contemporary Muslim jurists, and by the way, I'll come to this point later, contemporary Muslim jurists, in other words, those of modern times, contemporary Muslim jurists, though they have attempted to reinterpret many cases of naskh, seem to accept the same concept of permanent naskh. In their thinking, no attempt was made to disavow the concept, only to reinterpret it. Then he goes on to say, most jurists of the 2nd century Hijrah considered war as a rule rather than the exception between Muslims and non-Muslims, their understanding of the Quran had been less critical, owing to their having stopped at the literal meaning of each verse without making serious efforts to compare and reconcile verses that seem to contradict one another. Instead, the jurists claimed that certain verses abrogated certain other verses. This juristic understanding is a clear reflection of conditions in their times. This is on pages 83 to 84. Now, coming to that point I mentioned, which the author calls as contemporary Muslim jurists, the above learned author is disappointed that contemporary Muslim jurists only reinterpreted the application of abrogation and did not disavow it. Mullah Muhammad Ali, may Allah's mercy be upon him, head of the Lahore Ahmadiyya movement, is the scholar, is his contemporary, who has thoroughly analyzed the doctrine of abrogation as a whole, as well as analyzing specific examples of abrogating and abrogated verses, and refuted the entire concept as having no grounds in the Quran or in any statement whatsoever uttered by the Holy Prophet himself. And we covered this in study number 25. Now, here is something interesting. And when you try to find things using the internet searches these days, you come across all sorts of things of interest which you might not otherwise have come across. In our United Kingdom, there is a man by the name of Lord Pearson. He is the most hostile and bitter critic of Islam. And for a short while, he was even the leader of a political party, not a major political party though. Now, I discovered that this Lord Pearson, who of course is a member of the upper house, the House of Lords of the UK Parliament, he raised the doctrine of abrogation in the House of Lords in a debate on the 7th of December 2017. He asked that the UK government should encourage UK Muslim leaders to re-examine the Muslim tenets of abrogation. And then he went on to say this about abrogation. He said that, excuse me, he said that the doctrine of abrogation holds that the later verses in the Quran cancel the earlier previous, hold that the later verses in the Quran cancel the earlier peaceful verses. The verses of the sword cancel the verses of peace. So, for example, the much quoted early verse, "Let there be no compulsion in religion," is nullified many times in later verses. This is what bitter opponent of Islam, hostile critic of Islam, Lord Pearson, stated in the UK Parliament in its upper house, the House of Lords. So this doctrine of abrogation is not some academic quibbling. It has these practical results. So regrettably, by upholding the doctrine of abrogation, Muslim scholars are themselves providing grounds to the bitter critics of Islam to present it as a religion of intolerance and violence. And that brings to an end study 28. Barakallahu lana wa lakum fil Quran al-Azim wa rafa'na wa iyyakum bil ayati wal zikril hakim. इन्नहु ताला जवादुन करीमुन मलिकुन बर्रुर रऊफुर रहीम। अस्सलामु अलैकुम व रहमतुल्लाहि व बरकातुहू।